Men are generally known as strong, energetic human beings that do most of hard labor within society. Though of recent, women are getting more involved, but on a large scale, men still do these hard labors in the community that require high energy levels. From the nutritional point of view, last week we looked at calories and we understood that generally men require slightly higher energy levels compared to ladies or women. So in order to provide these energy levels required for men to perform their duties both at home and at work or office, we need to understand carbohydrates, or we need to understand this type of food called carbohydrates, because like we are going to understand, or we are going to discuss, or from the little knowledge we got from primary school or secondary school about the different types of foods and their general function, carbohydrates are known to supply a big chunk or a great deal of energy. And so me and you know, we used to say carbohydrates are energy giving foods. So today we want to understand carbohydrates. We are going to look at its chemical makeup, its digestion, the types of carbohydrates that we have, and why it is important to include carbohydrates, or what some people call carbs, in our meals on a daily. We are going to explore more of that. We're also going to look at why it's dangerous to consume, why it is actually dangerous to consume them above the required levels. My name is Chimbo Richard, and I welcome you again on our channel. It's a Friday, and every Friday we look at men and their health care challenges. We've looked at different topics in this. We've looked at men avoidance problems. We've looked at reasons why men's lifespan is actually decreasing while that of ladies is increasing. We looked at the reason why there is a discrepancy between life expectancy in men and women. Last week we looked at an important factor, or last week we looked at an introduction to nutrition in men, and we looked at kilocalories. We understood what calories mean, and today we want to add on by looking at carbohydrate as an essential meal, or as an essential source of energy to a man. Now, if you missed any of those topics, kindly pause here and go back and watch them, because since these are series, when you miss up one episode, you may not understand the current series. But if you're here and you've not yet subscribed, I kindly ask you to subscribe to our channel. Let's make the numbers grow, such that YouTube will be able to send this information to many more out there. But if you watched, remember to always share with your friends, because this information is free from me. Also do the courtesy of sharing it to many men outside there. Men are dying at a younger age, not because of diseases, but because of avoidable things, or things that we can discuss as men and understand the value and be able to live much longer as compared to the men that have died before us. I welcome you, and let's dive into the topic of the day by looking at carbohydrates in a more detailed manner. By definition, carbohydrates are organic compounds that are made of carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen chains. These are put together by strong bonds, and they are essential part of our nutrition because they provide the sugars that are used by our cells to manufacture energy, or they act as actually fuels for our body cells to manufacture their energy that they use to perform different functions. We have different types of carbohydrates, and some scholars or books will say we have 3, but are looking at their composition, and for the sake of us understanding carbohydrates in the simplest manner, we are going to divide carbohydrates into 2 groups. Number 1, we have those we call simple carbohydrates or sugars. And in these simple carbohydrates, generally we define them as carbohydrates that are made up either of one sugar or two sugars. Now, under the simple carbohydrates, again, we go down to break this into what we call monosaccharides or monosugars. The word saccharide means sugars, or mono, that means one, monosugars. These are foods that have a single sugar in them. For example, the glucose, the powdered glucose that you take when you're in your different activity, especially sports activity, it is just made up of one sugar. So you have the glucose, the fructose. But also the other classification under simple sugar are disaccharides. Now, these are sugars that are made up of two simple sugars. For example, we have the sucrose. So when you add the glucose and the fructose, you get the sucrose. Now, the sugar that you use at home to sweeten your tea is a sucrose. It's made up of two sugars. The other one, the lactose. This is the sugar in milk, which is made up of the galactose and the glucose. So those are the two types of sugars, the two types of classification that we have under simple sugars. Again, simple carbohydrates are those carbohydrates that have either one or two sugars. Second type of classification of carbohydrates, or the second type, are called complex carbohydrates, or we can say these are starchy foods or starches. And these are made up of polysaccharides, or they are made up of multiple sugars, more than two sugars that are put together. And these sugars are put together by strong bonds or chains that put them together. And to break down these bonds, most of the time we need to heat this carbohydrate or this starch at a higher temperature to make sure we disintegrate or we break down these strong chains. Under these complex carbohydrates, again, we have two types. Number one, we have the starches. The starches include all starchy food, the rice, the sweet potato, the corn. These ones need to be heated at a higher temperature in order to break down these strong bonds that are keeping these sugars together, for us to release the sugars or the glucose that is hidden in their smallest particles or molecules. That's when you eat raw starches, for example, you eat raw cassava, it is hard. Your body does not get the sugar that is strongly held together by the strong bonds. So in order for us to utilize the nutrients in these starches, we need to heat them at higher temperature such that the glucose is released when these bonds are broken down. And actually, people that have experience in cooking, you realize that actually these starches require some time of cooking at higher temperature for us to be able to turn them from their raw source to a cooked state, where our bodies can now, the enzyme can now crush this soft starch to make sure it squeezes out the glucose in them. The other type of complex carbohydrates are called fibers. Now, fibers in their state are not digestible, and so our bodies never really break them down to pick out the sugar or the different type of sugars that are in them, because most of the sources actually of these fibers, we eat them in their raw state. We never cook them. However, even if these fibers are not digestible, they are a very important component of our diet because they help in digestion, like we are going to discuss. As sources of carbohydrates, of course, we have different sources of carbohydrates on earth that God created. For example, we have the fruits, examples of bananas, berry. They're a good source of carbohydrates. We have the vegetables like the potato and the corn, or what we call maize, or kasoli in Uganda. We have the grains like rice, wheat. We have sweets and desserts like ice cream and cake. We also have the legumes like beans and the other lettuce. Now, the type of carbohydrate that you should consume should really depend on the amount of energy that you want to get, depending on the different activity that you're going to do, because these different sources are going to give you different amounts of carbohydrates. Previously, I've told you that we have a type of carbohydrate called fibers that is not going to give you any of the sugars because it is not digested by our bodies. So if you need a high chunk of for example, glucose in your body, then the fibers are not going to give you that. However, like we are going to see, the fibers play a different role in our digestion, and so they should be part of every meal that we eat, or they are a big part of carbohydrate, because they do a function that the digestible carbohydrates cannot do. For so many seasons and time, people have misused the term, the food called carbohydrate, or people have misused the carbs. Some people don't want to consume it because they say it is going to give them weight. So we are going to look at these details. How abuse of the amount of carbohydrates that we are supposed to take in a day can actually turn out to be dangerous to your body. Digestion and usage of carbohydrates in our body. We all know that carbohydrates are sources of energy for our body. Yes. However, like we've seen previously, we have a type of carbohydrate that is called fibers that are not digested by the body, and so they do not provide any sugars or glucose for our body. So let us start by looking at fibers. What are fibers? Fibers belong to a type of carbohydrate we discussed earlier, that is the complex carbohydrates or complex carbs, but they are not digestible by the body. So, sources of fibers in our body, they include the vegetables. Remember the vegetables, we said potato, the corn. So those string-like things you see in the potato or the corn, ebiwuziwuzi byemulaba ebiri mu lumonde oba kasoli. Those are sources of fiber. The other source are fruits. And the fruits, we look at banana, we look at berries, we look at mangoes. All the fruits that have those string-like structures in them. Ebiwuziwuzi byetulaba mu miyembe ebyo. Normally when you eat them, they will even get stuck in your mouth. Those are fibers. Then the whole grain. The whole grain, for example, the grain we talked about rice and wheat. So if you eat rice that is not processed, it comes with a great chunk of fibers. And then the cooked legumes, the cooked beans, the cooked peas, they also have fiber in them. So these fibers are not digested by the body. However, when they go into our GIT, that is the system, that is the, some people call it the alimentary tract, some people call it the gut, some people call it the food tube. When they go in there, number one, they play so many functions. Number one, because they are not digestible, they slow down digestion.